My guest today is Pranay Kotasthane, the Deputy Director of the Takshashila Institution, where he also leads the High Tech Geopolitics program. Many of you will know Pranay from his podcast, Puliyabaazi, or his newsletter, Anticipating the Unintended. He's also co authored several widely read books on public policy, including Missing in Action, When the Chips Are Down, and We the Citizens. Across the years, Pranay has written about his idea of societism, the view that society, like markets and the state, plays an essential role in human flourishing. When we spoke about what we might disagree on, he said something striking that a society's nationalism is not only unavoidable but unfairly criticized, especially by liberals and libertarians. That caught my attention. I'd never heard the modern liberal defense for nationalism and thought it would make for a great conversation. Hi, Pranay. Welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Deepak. Glad to be here.
Pranay, what is a nation?
So, I think to understand nation, we need to understand some Indian terms which people might relate to. So, the closest Indian term which I can relate to is a qawm. Qawm is a word which people will use in Urdu, in Pakistan, in India. And
I've never heard this term myself.
So, qawm, it relates to a feeling, right? It is a mental construct where I feel a part of a bigger group. That is, so I just want people to first focus that it is something to do with how we think, how we feel. It is a mental construct. Another Indian term that you can take is Nadu, right? Now that is not nation. Nadu refers to a country. Okay, country means a geographic area. So there are three different words that generally get conflated together. There is the nation, there's country, and the state. And people use all three terms interchangeably, but we need to first understand all three of them separately, and then we can go into the specific definitions of a nation, state, and a country. So a country is a geographic term. Nadu is a country, right? And it deals something with geography. So earlier, Nadu would have determined something to the west of the sea or to the right of this mountain, so on and so forth, right? So that is country. State refers to a political institution, right? An abstract political institution, which is generally the manifestation of it is a government. So government can be a managing body, just like a corporation is an abstract entity, and the board of directors of it will be the manifested entity of it. Similarly, state is that political abstract institution which has certain characteristics, like you would have heard of the Max Weber definition. It has the monopoly over the legitimate use of force, right? And its manifestation is a government. So this is a political institution. Nation, as distinct from a geographic entity and a political entity, is a mental construct. Okay, so the definitions of this are useful. So one of the most famous books of this is Imagined Communities by Benedict Anderson in 1983. So his definition is useful. A nation is an imagined political community, and imagined as both inherently limited and sovereign. This is the definition of a nation. So let's unpack all these terms. First thing is imagined. Okay, imagined means, in India, for example, a Manjunath from Bangalore does not know a Manjeet from Punjab. Okay, we can't possibly imagine every Manjunath will know a Manjeet from Punjab. And yet, there is something which tells the person that we are more similar to each other than, let's say, another name in Germany, right? So there is something which is connecting these people, even though the Manjeet and Manjunath don't know each other. What is that, right? That is what we are referring to as this idea of a nation. It is imagined doesn't mean it is imaginary. This is a very important distinction. People think nation is just imaginary, and because there is no physical, just because there is sometimes not a physical manifestation of it, it is not important. Imagined ideas can have really supreme power, right? All ideas have power. Even nation is an idea which can be supremely powerful. So it is an imagined thing. It has to be imagined because we can know people only we can only limited number of people, right? People who are around you. On average, how many? There's some Dunbar number, and there's a huge literature, right? So we know 150 people, but you can't get work done beyond these 150 people unless it is imagined. So there's something which is holding the Manjeet and Manjunath together, and that is the idea of imagined. Second is the idea of political. The second word here was political, right? Political means essentially it is about people. More than two people come together, they are thinking about politics, and it brings people together. The third one is it is a community. By community, it means that regardless of the inequality or exploitation that might prevail, the nation is always conceived as a deep horizontal comradeship. Right? So this is an idea. There's a brotherly feeling that both of us are similar, and that's why we are willing to do something for each other, play positive sum games, and even think that something which is of direct loss to me is fine because it is doing benefit to you, right? Even that, for example, we are okay for some form of redistribution, right? Every time there is redistribution even between Bangalore and Belgavi, right? But we are okay with it because we think there is some commonality between us, and it is okay for me to sacrifice something as long as there's some benefit for us, and there will be benefit overall for us, right? So that way it is a community. So imagined political community, we've heard. The next part of the definition is and imagined as both inherently limited. So in Anderson's definition, he says that you can't have a nation which consists of all of humanity. Okay, that will not, because if it is that expansive, then you are not able to define that feeling of being together does not appear. No nation can be as large to enough all people. There are always boundaries to the identity beyond which there exist other nations. And you always define nation in contrast to something else. And if that in contrast to something else doesn't exist, then it is not. So in fact, it goes against the Indian idea of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, right? That's all the world is a family, but we know all the world is not a family. But anyways, it's something good to aspire to. UN also aspires to it, but it is not really practical. So it is inherently limited and sovereign. The word sovereign comes because Anderson was writing with the Enlightenment period in mind, where people were fighting against autocratic kings, and they were saying that the voice of the people is more important. So in the voice of the people, there is some sovereignty. So this is the definition: imagined political community, imagined as both inherently limited and sovereign. So that's my first definition. Should we take another definition?
Yeah, absolutely, yes.
So this is...
And the first definition is one you agree with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree with all definitions of nation. I agree with those are the ones I'm telling you.
Okay.
So then there is another structural definition. Now there's a very famous scholar of nationalism, Ernest Gellner, and he has a book on that. So let me give a structural definition which is similar to what I've said, but that will put things in context. So he says there are two characteristics of a nation. I'll read it out now. Quote, "Two men are of the same nation if and only if they share the same culture, where culture in turn means a system of ideas and signs and associations and ways of behaving and communicating." Point one. Point two, I quote, "Two men are of the same nation if and only if they recognize each other as belonging to the same nation." In other words, nations maketh man. Nations are the artifacts of men's convictions and loyalties and solidarities. A mere category of persons, say occupants of a given territory or speakers of a given language, for example, becomes a nation if and when the members of the category firmly recognize certain mutual rights and duties to each other in virtue of their shared membership of it. It is their recognition of each other as fellows of this kind which turns them into a nation, and not the other shared attributes, whatever they may be, which separate that category from non-members. Right? So this is something similar to what I told you in the beginning with an example of Manjeet and Manjunath, right? That is what it is. telling in a very formal manner. So this is a structural definition of what a nation is. Again, it is emphasizing what people think. There's no territory is just one way in which people might feel part of a political community. It's not always the case. So that's how I will stop and let you comment on it.
Yeah. This is a very curious thing. To anybody listening, of course, it makes sense. Because when I say that I am an Indian or that you say you are an Indian, we both presume that we feel the same feeling. We both feel a feeling of we are in the same in-group. That in-group is that we are Indians, as opposed to the out-group, non-Indians. And in that way, we are brethren of some sort, because you are Indian, I am Indian, and so we are brothers. And I'll spend a little bit of time on this. But I'm trying to understand, if we go one level deeper, what does that mean? To say I am an Indian, what does Indian mean? Many of these definitions work backwards. They're saying that if all parties agree that they have a common culture, and if all parties agree that the other party is part of this same in-group, and you have a common political identity, etc., then you are Indian. But what is Indian? Am I making sense? This feels like a reverse definition.
No, absolutely. So we can define, so now we can say what constitutes a nation, right? That's the question that you're asking. What makes a nation?
Like that. Maybe. I mean, that's one way to phrase the question. If I think about other imaginary things, so for example, let's say religion, right? People of a particular group will say that I am a Christian, let's say. And if I ask them, what does that mean? What is Christianity? There's a coherent story. It's something like, here's a book, and this book has a story. And this objective story, word for word, brought to me by the Lord Jesus Christ, is Christianity. Or if I ask Jews, they'll point at the Torah. I feel like there may not be a deeper question to ask. Beyond that point, I can no longer ask what is Christianity, because they have told me this is what Christianity is. But when I ask what is being an Indian, they sort of say us, like we are Indian. And I'm trying to understand what is that, or rather we can do it by differentiation. What is different about being an Indian that is not there in being a Sri Lankan?
Correct. So the way you would look at it is, now that we have established that nations are mental constructs, those mental constructs can be defined in various ways, right? It can sometimes, like Ernest Gellner's definition say, it is the commonality of religion. Okay, it can be a commonality of language. It can be a commonality of a shared historical experience. Or it could be something else. It could just be you are isolated on an island and you live together for a long period and you have common enemies over and over again. Maybe, for example, you are on you're on a mountaintop and there are people around you on the sea, and you are defining yourself against the people who are on the coast. It can be as quotidian as that as well. So all those can be determinants of forming a nation. Okay. Now I'm not going into specifics. What is the Indian? What is Sri Lankan? It can be of various ways. So that is what a nation is. Now coming to your question about what is Indian, that is one kind of a nation, right? So the way people have articulated Indian nation is also different, right? If you ask a person who is thinking about from a Hindu right persuasion, right, or a Hindutva persuasion, they would say that, see, nations are divinely ordained. You would say that there is a Bharat Mata which has existed from a long period of time, and that's why you need nationalism to uphold something which already existed. Another idea of the same Indian identity could be that, India has been a civilizational state. We've had cultural continuity from the Indus Valley civilization, and that brings some uniformity to people who are in this part of the world compared to, let's say, someone who is in Afghanistan or in Europe, right? So that could be another one.
Correct.
Third one could be, the same Indian nation could be that, no, forget about all this. There was a nationalism. So it is, we've not gone into religion as such, but a third definition could be that, all of us fought against someone who were the Britishers, or the idea of colonialism, and all the people who resisted that in this part of the world are combined by that experience, and that constitutes a nation. So it could be all these are parts of an Indian nation, right? And you can define nation in very different ways. Because it is mental construct, it is inherently multiple. It can also be Indian nation can also be nation of sub-nations, right? It can be an agglomeration of sub-nations. For example, you can be a part of the Kannada nation and be a part of the Indian nation. In fact, the state anthem itself says that, right? Jai Bharat Jananiya Tanujate Jai Hai Karnatak Mate, right? So you're talking about there is a Bharat Mate and there is a Karnatak Mate also, and both of them, one is a Tanuja, so sister, and one is a Mate, right? So you are sort of creating these imaginations where you are trying to say that there is a Kannada nationalism, but it fits into this overarching idea of the Indian nation. So some of your sub-nationalism can reinforce the bigger nation. Some can run against. So if you were saying that, we are a different nation and we are not part of India, that could also be an idea. That would be of a separate nation. But I'm just trying to tell you that the Indian nation itself can be defined in various ways.
Do you feel like it's defined in 1 billion ways, in that we have 1 billion people? So when you say Manju and Manjeet, Manju may believe in the Bharat Mata version of this story, and Manjeet may think that Nehru is right, and Nehru's definition of nationalism in our nation is what is the Indian nation. And those are competing in so many ways. Just first principles, they disagree on so much about what is India. But Manju says, I'm an Indian, Manjeet says, I'm an Indian, and both look across the country and say, brother, we are both Indians. What's happening here? Are they both Indians?
Yeah. As long as they feel that the thing that unites them. So yeah, there are certain overlaps and there are certain things which might not be similar, because your definition of Indian might not be the same as mine, right? So obviously, but there might be some places where we agree, right? Maybe we agree on the civilizational idea of India, or maybe we agree that, yeah, all of us resisted the British rule, and all the people who have been a part of this constitute one idea of a nation. So there might be those overlaps, and as long as there are those overlaps, the idea of a nation stands.
Got it. Okay, so I want to trouble you on a little bit of these things, but I want to do a few more definitions first, so that for listeners, right? So we define nation, and by the way, so you mentioned Ernest Geller. Gellner, sorry. There's another essay by Ernest Renan which I came across, which had a very beautiful paragraph. So I'm quoting, says, a nation is a soul, a spiritual principle. Two things, which in truth are but one, constitute the soul or spiritual principle. One lies in the past and the other in the present. One is the possession in common of a rich legacy of memories, and the other is present-day consent, the desire to live together, the will to perpetuate the value of the heritage that one has received in an undivided form. And so broadly, I think the other definition you laid out also is very similar, where you have two parts of the puzzle. The first is what has happened. So we have a story about what came before us. And the second is, it's like the daily plebiscite, right? It's an everyday vote to continue to be part of this quote-unquote nation. And if both those boxes are ticked, that we seem to share a common story about the past and we seem to continue to want to live together in the present, then we constitute a coherent group called a nation.
Yeah, it's a lovely definition. I agree with it. So there is a storytelling element, right? We are talking about the past, just like all narratives. There is some story articulation of. So people created that, right? There was this Nehru created a story of how India was, a discovery of India, which was telling a story that largely we were living together amicably for a long period of time. It was a story, right? People have contested it as well. But it was a story which was powerful, which large number of people bought into. So yeah, it's a nice definition.
Yeah, I liked it as well. I'll put it in the show notes. Okay, so we define nation. Nationalism then I think is just the loyalty or adherence to nation, or the idea of a nation. Is that enough, or do you feel more?
So there is another definition of that as well. Again, there's a book by Eli Keduri on nationalism itself, the title. So he says, nationalism is the doctrine which holds that humanity is naturally divided into nations, and that nations are known by certain characteristics which can be ascertained. So this is one definition of nationalism.
Got it. Understood. And I also want to do citizen. So citizen is a person who is in the in-group. They are a member of the nation.
No. Citizen is a characteristic of a state. You belong to a state. You're a citizen of a state, not of a nation. Nation is mental construct. Huh? So, for example, I can belong to the Indian nation, and someone who's a US citizen but of Indian origin might feel that he is actually more connected to India. Okay, just because he's probably born here and just so he can be a part of the same nation. We could be a part of the nation, but we are not part of the same state. So he's not an Indian citizen.
A man from Nigeria catches a flight and comes to India, and then goes around telling people that he is an Indian, right? Not country nor state, but in mind he is an Indian. How do we test this? What is a coherent test to ascertain that he is telling the truth?
We don't need to. If he believes that,
but we also have to know, because the part of the definition is
correct.
that.
So essentially, then that's your second part of the definition, right? It's a daily consent, daily vote. Do people buy into that? Like, if he maybe, for example, if he starts speaking Kannada, okay, over time, I think a lot of people will say, yeah, he's adopted something which is Indian, which makes him like me. And then I will probably consider them as part of it. It happens, right? For example, many times when there is this famous Sikh guy who's on Instagram who speaks very good Kannada. And there is this idea that, oh, wow, like if he's learnt it, I think he's a part of me more than others. So that could be just one example, right? It could be language, or maybe he's a big fan of Indian food, or it might be something of that sort, which makes people vote in that daily consent that yes, he's more like me than unlike me.
But I mean, do you think there's a real world in which he ever gets accepted as an Indian? Because he wasn't. The challenge, of course, he's not off the land. That is, he wasn't born somewhere on the Indian subcontinent.
Yeah. And
most nations point back to some physical geography, even if it has not been realized. That is, under British Raj, many people had the idea of an Indian, of India. They were all Indians, and yet no physical state had manifested because it was currently under colonial rule. But eventually, there is a physical place on the world to point to and say, this is where India is. In approximation, this is what it means to be Indian. And if somebody is born in Nigeria, then they're not Indian, simply by dint of the fact that they're not born in India, or in the Indian subcontinent, or in the Indian region. Is that reasonable? That it's, I mean, I would postulate it is impossible that a Nigerian man can never become an Indian.
No, they can become an Indian, right? I mean, an example of that is Sonia Gandhi itself. She's the leader of a very powerful political party in India, right? She's an Italian, but people accepted her as an Indian, right? What does that tell us?
That marriage is a good way to...
Yeah, it could be that she became an Indian, right? People accepted her as an Indian. I mean, people voted for her. So what does that tell us? That we accepted a person who was outsider, born outside India, but we accepted. In India itself, there is a long history of Anglo-Indians as well, right? So there were Britishers also who stayed back in India and who are accepted as Indians, right? Because William Dalrymple is not an Anglo-Indian, but he is a part of India in that sense, because people would think that he's done a lot in terms of writing about India, in terms of knowing India. So it is just that it is people would attribute, if people have certain characteristics, attributes, based on that, people can find common bonds. If they feel there is a horizontal comradeship with that person, even if they are of a different ethnicity, color, it can always form. Nations can evolve that way.
These are very interesting examples. Okay, we've defined nation and nationalism, and your sort of your positive statement is that, or your claim is that nationalism is a good idea, or that it can be a force for good. So just tell us a little bit more, because that's sort of what the complex claim here is, right? That's the bit that's really the meat over here.
So the reason why I wanted to discuss this is because, see, nationalism is generally seen in negative terms, right? Especially when we come from this idea of liberalism or libertarianism, which is something that we have ascribed to in most circumstances, me, you, both, right? Many of its ideas. But in that canon, nationalism is seen in a negative way.
Correct.
Now, my contention is that you have to make peace with nationalism. Nationalism is a force for good because nationalism is unavoidable. Nationalism always exists because it is in. If you want to get things done beyond the 150 people you need to be able to form a broader imagined political community. If you don't form it, someone else will form it, and someone else will form it in probably bad ways, right? So it can be in a very exclusivist manner. So for example, one way of defining a nation could be just that if you are my co-religionist, you are part of this nation. If you are or some sect of that religion, and if you are not, you are outside the nation. That could be a very exclusivist definition, or it could be a very inclusivist definition that all of us who've been part of this historical experience over 300 years, even though we might be of different religions, different nations, we are part of that nation. So both ideas will exist, whether you like it or not, it will exist. So you have to contend with it. And I say it is a force for good because if you want to do big things, if you want to create mega projects, if you want to do big ideas propagation, you need a bigger mass of people who agree with you, right? And that can only happen through this idea of a nation. So my imagination, this is something Nitin also talks about, Nitin Pai of Takshashila, who's been on this podcast, right? That the Indian idea of a nation is something useful for the world at large, right? Because we are talking about this nation which doesn't have one religion, which doesn't have one language, but this is a mega multinational state, right? Which is, there are many nations, but all of those nations have this, they have sub nations, and then there is a big Indian nation, and it is able to bring the subcontinental force to the world, and we are able to live together largely peacefully, even though we are 1/6 of humanity, right? As against Europe, you would say, in fact, the European Union is still trying to do what Indian Union did in 1947, right? Before that, all of Europe was just fighting with each other. Though that idea of nation there was very exclusionist, right? It was, if you know German, you are a part of Germany. If you know French and that's the language, you are a French person, and that led to so much of fighting. That led to world wars. So that's what we are talking about this idea of nation at large.
When you look at the common history of India, across the width and breadth of India, the only piece of history that seems truly common is colonial rule. Otherwise, different parts of the country have had their own independent histories. Nothing has been such a large part of the Indian, quote-unquote, Indian story, that every part of the Indian subcontinent has been equally affected by that single act or action or that one trail. Am I wrong about this?
It is contestable. I would say so because, for example, there's a very famous book called India, Sacred Geography by Diana Eck. So what she contends is, so she's a scholar of Sanskrit and at Harvard, I think. So what she writes is that there was always this idea of a Hindu civilization. I mean, and it not in an exclusivist term, that because it was just a language of this place, and a lot of people there were certain common strands that united people even before the British rule, right? So in fact, what she points to is many of our like temples in the south will also, which would have been created thousands of years ago, their iconography might be similar to, they are trying to replicate a Kashi here, or they are trying to replicate some Kailasha here. So how is that happening, right? There is some imagination that Kailasa, which is 2000 kilometers away, is still part of us, and that's why we want to create it 2000 kilometers away, right? So there is a sacred idea which might be common to people. So people contest that. I would say a better way of defining a nation is, yes, what happened between the after the colonial rule, because that is, in today's times, it is more inclusive, right? That allows us to bring people who might not be following Hindu religion as well. But I think people will contest that it was Indian nationalism was a outcome of colonial struggles. This is one way. Some people say that no, Indian nation always existed. There were these civilizational continuities which have existed from 3,000, 4,000 years ago, and we are a part of that lineage.
Right. The example that you gave is still not a political example, and hence does not meet the nation definition. It's a religious example. So we can say that we are all part of the same group identity for the last, 10,000 years, and that group identity is approximately Hinduism or the morphing story of Hinduism over time. But the political manifestation has always been bits and pieces, and there's never been a single ruler or a single country.
So there has not been an Indian state.
Correct.
Right? We can say that. Correct. So maybe one way to think about is, nation is looking at a political idea as well, right? Whereas we had civilizational continuity, civilizational commonalities, but we didn't imagine that to be a very important political force. Right, in the Indian imagination, that okay, I am similar to someone else and I want to replicate the religious iconography, but I don't necessarily need this to be a political co-equal from that place. That could be a case, right?
Yes.
So the word nation itself is a recent one, right? And Indian conception of nation was different, right? So that's what the idea of a calm, etc., was something which might not have the political tones to it.
Got it. And I have two ways I want to then branch this out. The first is, since you believe in evolution, I'm sure, and natural selection,
yes,
all of us are Africans, if you just go far back enough. And so from a civilizational argument standpoint, the truest form of the argument is that all of us are from the great nation of Africa or Pangaea or some undivided original landform. If you go further back, then not even the human species. And so one way to look at this would be that we're picking an arbitrary starting point. We're saying that the Indus Valley civilization, which was the first meaningful civilization in this subcontinent, is what we're choosing as our starting point. But there's no rational basis for it. And if one argued well enough, then you could just go further back until everybody on Earth is my cousin in some form or the other. So I'll pause here. This is one way to look at it. But I know you'll say, yes, Deepak, a nation is arbitrary. So it's fine. If everybody chooses an arbitrary starting point, that's okay. But why should we? And why should we pick this starting point? Why not argue for moving further back in time?
No, we should argue. We can, but it would be very difficult to imagine, because in this sense, if you take the definition, right, it is inherently limited, because beyond a point that just the story won't be powerful enough. The story that all of us are one. We've been trying to make this for a long time, right? But we don't think in those lines, because we need beyond a particular point of time, it just seems too big, too unwieldy to manage. And that's why we limit ourselves at some point of time, that we are this and no more. Right? And that can change over time, right? But I think there is at some point of time, it just becomes unwieldy and you will not be able to imagine. So for example, the story that all of us are from Africa, I don't think it's a powerful story. Like, maybe we know from an evolution perspective, but it's not a powerful story. You can't have a flag which you can wave against someone else who is not part of this. Everyone is part of it, and it doesn't give you competition is also important in this idea of a nation, right? Who are you united against if all of you are same? People know that, and yet we create this idea that no, I know all of us have finally got some common group of ancestors, but we still have this urge, this feeling that some of us are more similar than others, right? So I think it is unavoidable.
And the second way I wanted to push back was, you spoke about India as being this, being a family of families, that we have internal stories. So you can be part of the nation of Karnataka, but that nation of Karnataka in some coherent way fits into this larger story of the nation of India. And the positive story you want to tell is that inclusivity, secularism, these sorts of values of bringing more people into the fold as opposed to being exclusionary, is part of the story of what India is.
Yes.
Right?
Well framed. Yeah.
But in parallel, you're also saying that by definition nation is exclusionary. There has to be the other. And this can't go on forever. That is, this us being inclusive and bringing people into the fold will eventually have to end, because at some point there has to be somebody who is in the out group so that we can be all part of the in group. Those are two competing forces.
Yes.
So at some point our ability to be inclusive will stop. I mean, is
Correct.
that
Yes,
inherent in the
that's
claim?
why the biggest nation you can create is the Indian nation. There is no other nation in the world which is bigger than the Indian nation.
Could we have the Indian nation, but also, for example, have Sri Lanka be part of our nation?
That's for Sri Lankans to decide, right? If they feel that they are part of the Indian nation, they will become a part of the Indian nation, even though they might not be a part of the Indian state. But I don't think they think of themselves that way. So it's not.
No, but I'm saying in theory that if because of the inclusive nature of the Indian state.
Yes, it could. Right? In fact, that's how the story of India is, right? For example, even when the Indian state was created, Goa was not a part of it. Sikkim was not a part of it. Hyderabad was not a part of it. Today, all the people in these regions would think of them as part of the Indian nation, not just a part of the Indian state.
Correct.
So that means we have the Indian nation has expanded.
Right. So in theory, the Indian nation could expand to Sri Lanka and Nepal, and at some point we did. Bangladesh was part of the Indian nation. So Bangladesh and Myanmar. And you can imagine this going further to more Southeast Asian countries and then to more Asian countries. Why would it stop?
I think that's what, at some point of time, that story will become very weak, right? The thing which has united the Indian part is because there was some civilizational continuity, some vague notion that, there is some commonality, and that was reinforced by the anti-colonial struggle. Right, so there were layers which built this. But if you were to go to Southeast Asia, where there are there is no religious civilizational continuity existed at some point of time, but there are way too many contestations. Then there is no common colonial part as well. Some parts were ruled from India, but not all of them. So it will break.
Like I think about how the Aryan invasion theory, is something that folks on the Hindutva right have a deep problem with, because in one way it breaks the story, right? It breaks their story about what makes the Indian nation and what unites the Indian people. And so we embark on a rewriting potentially of history to create a story that brings them into the fold. For example, large parts of Southeast Asia are also Buddhist, or they have strong Buddhist roots. And Buddhism is part of the larger manifold of Hindu-esque religions, Hindu-esque spiritual starting points. And so we could imagine how we could convince them to be part of our story. And I know I'm doing this in a long-winded way, but I'm trying to make a claim here. And the claim is that the liberal types that you have been chatting with who don't have a nationalist agenda actually do have a deeply nationalist agenda. But the nationalism is like very straightforward and simple. It's a like a two-line story. It is just the classic liberal position. So what they are saying is that every human being is part of this story. Each of them has the right to self-ownership, and from this the right to their own body. So like right to life, movement, all the negative rights that we talk about, the right to private property, all of those things. And the role of the state that we have enlisted is to protect these rights. Why do we all share these rights? Because we are human. In fact, it's a very powerful story. The story is that for large parts of history, people were enslaved or raped or murdered, didn't have meaningful sense of justice, were not part of their own franchise, not electing their own population, their own political representation. And today we have the ways and means to make that happen. And we are all part of the same in-group. And that in-group is that we are liberal Democrats. The out-group, and there exists one, is those who are not. So anybody who is intolerant in some way, that is, you want to have your religion come before classic liberalism, or if you want to have, a communist first position that doesn't agree with classic liberalism, then you are part of the out-group. But we have an in-group. It doesn't start at the Indus Valley civilization. It doesn't even start at constitutional India. It starts at this premise, right? And then we're saying that, okay, then we're a constitutional republic. Anybody who consents is in the in-group. It's an open border. Please come in. The only reason that you'll be thrown out is if you don't agree with these first. You can't harm anybody, right? These are our rules. Otherwise, everybody is allowed. And in that way, they do have a nationalist agenda. And I feel like it's the same as the Indian story you've been telling. They've just gone a little bit more meta. Like they're saying that we're actually going to drop all these parts of our spiritual, religious, common history, colonial struggle. Those are not relevant stories. We do have a deeply human struggle, all of us together. And to solve that, we have the classic liberal position, and that's what we're uniting around. Is that reasonable? Then they have the idea of a nation.
It's a weak story. That's what I would say. Who thinks of themselves as I am, you and I are similar because we are liberal Democrat? I would say it's like all the words in that are contested. You don't know who's a liberal. There are 30 garden varieties of liberals. New York liberal will be very different from a classical liberal. Democratic, that's... So all these, part of a republic, all these are characteristics of a state. Right? What defines all? I am saying go beyond state. State is just one articulation of the community, of a human community. But so in that sense, to me, there is this definition is putting way too much distinction between the individual and the state at two different ends. There is a third part, which is society. Nation, the idea of nation is saying that there is this sense of belonging. That belonging comes from we inherently want to feel that way. We will feel that way. And in that sense, I think that's a weak story. There's no nation state in this world which defines in the terms that you have told.
You're absolutely right. I'm going to try and make the argument from a libertarian position. Okay, so for the next few minutes, I am a libertarian, and I'm going to take that point of view.
Okay.
One reason why a story is weak. So, for example, the French story that the people can form a nation, self-representation, was a very weak story for hundreds of years. It didn't exist. Even the idea that people would walk into a booth and vote for their political representation was laughable. And there existed no other form of meaningful government other than being ruled by a small collection of people or an oligarchy or something until 300 years ago, 400 years ago. It's a relatively very new idea. And today, 400 years hence, when we look at this story, we actually think of it as a very powerful story. We say that this is a story that has gripped you, has gripped me. We will never go and live under autocratic rule. And we truly believe that people should have the right to vote. If I tell you now that, Pranay, somebody is too uneducated to make a meaningful vote, or that person doesn't know foreign policy, how can they vote on foreign policy? Or this politician is an idiot, how can he be allowed to stand to be a politician? You will say, no, Deepak, we believe in this story. And the story is that individuals have these weird things called fundamental rights, inherent rights. We hold this to be self-evident. And then we form constitutions around this. We give you the right to vote and all of that. And this story is one that didn't exist 400 years ago, but does exist today, and is a very powerful story. And I think the libertarian argument, or the classic liberal argument, would be something like that. They would say that it's a story that hasn't taken shape yet because of two gaps. The first, the theory is just not known. You need to have the right political moment to be able to tell the story in the right way. And the second, we don't have the right storyteller yet. This is also like, I would think about Donald Trump 10 years ago, or when did he, 2016? So yeah, 12 years ago, if you told me that Trump would be president, and then he would be president for 8 of the next 12 years, I'd say that's crazy. And if you told me that the story in the US would be about immigration, that would be the primary point of contention, or that they would go back to a tariff regime, that would be a very big thing that Trump would do, and he'd get voted into power for doing this. I'd say that's crazy. That's not possible. It's a really weak story for someone to run on. But I don't think politics works like this. I think you just need the right storyteller, and you need the right moment in political history, and then that will emerge. But what the liberal is saying, that there is only one good national story. Every other story that is not this story is bad. By definition, it curtails rights, it takes away consent, it steals from the individual. So we must believe in the first principle. The first principle is that we should believe that individuals have rights, and we self-organize, and we have open borders and free trade and all the other things that come with this position. And then it's a matter of us telling the story over and over again until that becomes the nation. And in that way, the libertarian does have a strong idea of a nation, just not one that... And they have an outgroup also. The outgroup is people who are not liberal. Just not one that has manifested yet. So, is that one way to maybe make the argument that they're making?
Yeah. So let me counter this, right? First of all, I think Trump's, I lost the train of thought, but he will only be there for the next 4 years, hopefully, if there's no constitutional change. But
I think we should put money on this actually and come back.
So on this idea, right? Let's take the French example itself, which you explained. The French nation was created. why did it not have Germans as a part of it? People who could have subscribed to this should have been a part of it, right? But the French nation didn't.
Should have, yes.
Why?
A libertarian would say that they were still very primitive. They had not thought the idea through fully. So they'd figured out individual franchise, they'd figured out self-representation, but just not that the other person was like themselves. It's like asking why the American Constitution still allowed slavery. It was a very good starting place. They just hadn't figured out, they hadn't made the leap yet that we need to include blacks as well or women as well as part of the larger franchise. But we'll get there. I mean, the arrow is pointing in that direction.
Yeah, right. So my contention is, that's what the interesting question is, does nation come first or nationalism come first? There are two different takes on this.
Tell me more, I didn't understand this.
So does nation come before and then you have nationalism to uphold that nation, or it is the nationalism which manufactures nation? Both are two different points, right? Now, my contention on the French example would be that French nationalism came first. Okay, because of Benedict Anderson writes, for example, people after the printing press started consuming language in a particular, consuming news in particular languages in Europe, and that manufactured the nationalism that French people, the people who were reading French started seeing the world in a particular way, which was different from what the Germans were reading and what the Danes were reading probably, right? So, and that created this French nationalism, and from that French nationalism came the idea that we should form a French nation and we should oppose the ruler, and we need to create an inherently limited body of French people and then we'll form a state of that. Okay, so that's like my story. Now coming back to your point of, you were saying that finally a good storyteller hasn't come. That might be.
Yeah.
Now, I wanted to think of it in a different way, that I think that story, even if there's a very good storyteller, it will still be a very weak story, because libertarianism gives way too much importance to individualism. And when you make individualism so high up in the hierarchy, you demote all the things which give that sense of belonging, which give that sense of the characteristics of a nation, which says that, I mean, even there are limits to individualism which libertarians would also agree to, right? There is that harm principle and others. But there is so much weight given to individualism in the idea of libertarianism that it becomes weak, and people will just, even if there's a good storyteller, I think the story will still be weak.
Okay, I'm going to try this in a different way, okay? I'm going to make the claim that good nationalism should have nothing to do with a shared history beyond the fact of being human. That fact, the fact that we are human, in one way is a very profound story, because it means you feel what I feel, you suffer like I suffer, you fear for the same things I fear about, and you love in the same way I love. So that story is a very powerful story in itself. But from a practical history standpoint, whether we had the same uncles go to war or fought the same wars, none of that truly matters when it comes to a good nationalism, right? The only thing that matters is this quote-unquote daily plebiscite that we're talking about. And a daily plebiscite, in effect, is a plebiscite on a collection of values. So you could be a highly conservative society, and then people show up every day and continue to want to be part of a conservative society. Or you be part of a socialist state, and people show up every day and say, yes, I do want a socialist state to live in. And because all nationalism is, in this definition, right, because it should have no relevance to history, but only to present day values, then all nationalism is effectively political ideology. That is, are you a socialist? Are you a libertarian? Are you a dash, whatever, fill in the blank? Then people like you, or anybody who's fighting for good nationalism, should argue for classic liberal first positions, because of all the political options available, this is the very best that we have. Does this train of thought make sense? Again, I'm arguing as a libertarian, but they would say something like this.
Okay, let's unpack this. So if the idea is that all of us share something common, and that's why we belong to this nation of, then entire humanity is included.
But it doesn't include anybody who is not a classic liberal. So if you want to put your religion before.
So this is also exclusionary.
It is, it is a nation.
Yeah.
But I'm arguing with your contention that the liberals in Indian politics today are not nationalist. I am saying that they're profoundly nationalist. Their definition of a nation is this: the nation is a classic liberal nation. With no regard to history, no regard to, there's no common shared anything except for the fact that we are humans and that we value individual autonomy.
Okay. I don't think that's how the a libertarian would think. That for my perception of a liberal or libertarian would be that nationalism leads to bad things. And see, because if they were defining it in this way, then they are agreeing that nations exist, that nationalism is good.
But why,
if they agree, then I have no problem.
But what they're pushing back on is they'll say that basically the definition of nation or nationalism is equal to definition of classic liberal, because nothing else is left. If you remove the classic liberal out of my definition of a nation, nothing else is left in that pot. And so then they will say, okay, cool. If you're saying that the definition of your nationalism is my definition of classic liberalism, then we're on the same page. We're in the same party. But that's the contention. The contention is that in a good nation, if I take out all classic liberal values, nothing is left.
Okay. I think that is assuming that what is there in this classical liberal canon has all the truth, and others don't have that truth, which is not the case. There are very powerful other ways of telling stories and other ways that unite people much more powerfully than this.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely. And they are the other.
Yeah.
Which classic liberals have forever agreed up. If you ask a libertarian what kind of state you want, then she will say, I want a night watchman state where we enlist a government who protects, they do defense, they do rule of law and nothing else. And you don't have to come to this country if you don't like it.
See, that's what I'm saying. No person gives so much importance to the state in day-to-day terms. Like, this is probably what libertarians would think, and I agree with that position from a public policy point of view. But people don't define themselves in terms of their public policy choices.
Yet.
Yet. Not for 2,000 years, not for 3,000 years. Maybe at some point of time they will. Maybe. I don't know. But as of now, the state is not that important to most people's daily experiences. For people, their neighbors, their community, in India, unfortunately, even the caste group might be more important. Okay, in some other places, it might be a co-religionist, co-regionist that might be important. That is more important for a person on a day-to-day basis. Not like, only libertarians and some people like us who are working in public policy think that the state, but that's not the lived experience of people, right? So I would say you're giving way too much importance to the state, and that's not what people think of. That's why this will be always a very weak story.
Okay, I want to come back to this. I'm going to put a pin here. When we were chatting earlier, I told you this story, but I'll just say it again for the sake of the listeners. My younger brother is one big cricket fan, and he supports RCB. Okay. And I've always been trying to understand what that means. What does it mean to support RCB? For those uninitiated, there's a cricket, what is it called? A tournament, a league in India called the IPL, where there's a team called the RCB that plays cricket. And so the thought experiment is, let's say that RCB and CSK are playing a cricket match. They go out, half an innings is done. So one team has batted, the other team has bowled. There is a score. And at the half inning point, everyone goes back to the locker rooms. And their management has shown up in the locker rooms and tells them that, look, we've decided to sell the business. And the CSK team has been sold to the RCB owners. The RCB team has been sold to the CSK owners. The team has no choice. They swap jerseys and they come back out to play the rest of the innings. Now my question to him is, you are at the stadium. Who do you support? Right? And his answer is RCB. Yeah. And I'm asking him, what the fuck is RCB? Like, what does that mean if it's not the players? And it's not, I don't know, it's not the shared history. Like, it's what is left? What is RCB? And he just sort of has this blanket position that whatever happens, it doesn't matter what it is, I will support RCB. If they change their colors, if they change their city, if they change the players, if they change the management, it doesn't matter. And this is like saying that it's like a ship of Theseus, right? Like, I love the ship, but what is the ship? What part of the ship should I remove for you to cease to be loyal to the ship? Something like that. And to me, your example of nationalism rings something like this. When somebody says that I'm an Indian, when Manju says it and Manjeet says it, and Manju and Manjeet have nothing in common. They've never met each other. They don't speak the same language, not the same religion, not the same definition of what it means to be Indian. Then what they're basically saying is we support RCB. And I'm asking, what is that? What is the thing that you support exactly? I don't know if is this a coherent way to ask the question, but I'm a little bit struggling about what this container is.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, that there will be a lot of overlap between what that Manjeet and Manjunath believe about the Indian idea. So they agree that we share something common, right? We share something common, and that's why we call ourselves Indians. And that is an important identity for me to have.
Can I just, interject here? When you say they share something common, I'm going to just give you two categories, okay? If there's a third, you tell me. Do they share a common history? This could be spiritual, colonial, okay? Do they share a common history? Or do they share a common set of current values?
Both. Like we saw that definition, right? It is a daily vote and it is a past. There's
Correct.
A commonality. And large parts of their imagination are overlapping with each other. And that's why they are part of the Indian, they think they are part of the Indian nation. Some people might think they are not. One of the two conditions might not be met. So they are not part of the Indian nation, right? Now coming to your RCB question. Yeah. So now going to your RCB question, did you ask your brother this question that if it were named Royal Challengers Hyderabad, would he still support them?
I asked him the reverse, which is that what if the RCB franchise was based in Hyderabad, something like that. But I never questioned whether the name itself could be changed. Like what's in a name? But yeah,
I think that's the image. For him, the important part is not who. In a way, the thought experiment that you imagined is already playing out because none of the players in RCB are from Bangalore. Right? Yeah, like even today. So
of course,
it's effectively the same as you put that red T-shirt on some 11 good players from anywhere in the world or any part of India, largely. Okay, and yet even today, people throng the stadia to watch the people wearing that red shirt, right? So I think the powerful thing is that it is part of Bangalore. People buy in that idea. People want to support something which is Bangalorean. It can be a cricket team, it can be a football team. Who wears that doesn't matter. And I think once you frame it that way, then they also do things which will try to own up to that identity, right? I mean, they will play most of their games in Bangalore.
Yeah.
They the imagery will be about Bangalore, about Karnataka, even though they might not be Kannadigas, right? The people who are playing in that team. So that imaginary, that builds onto that for people who are already thinking of Bangalore in a particular way, it reinforces that identity, and that's why he will still support it.
Okay. I'm not contesting that there is such a thing as a nation. Of course there is. I'm not contesting that there is such a thing as nationalism. There clearly is. RCB, if RCB can evoke strong emotions for you, the state of India, or the nation, of India, certainly can. I am contesting the claim that nationalism is good in any way that is not the classic liberal definition. So that's my current. I want to try and do this in other ways in maybe half an hour or so. But right now I'm saying that the libertarian definition of nationalism, which is that what we all agree on is that we maximize individual liberty and rights, and we have a night watchman state. That is the only good definition of nationalism. Beyond anything else added to that pot turns nationalism bad.
Why?
Yeah, exactly. Right? And then,
all of us, I mean, if you take the Indian nationalism,
correct,
which is of the Nehru kind, right? We all shared some common historical experience, which was colonialism. It can be, the state can be socialist. It was in his imagination. Today, the state is not socialist, or at least it is still socialist technically because that's written in our constitution. But I think people would say we don't want to. But that's a state part. But if nationalism was formed on this idea that we are part of this, where is some cultural continuity, also we resisted the Britishers in a good way, largely, where we said we don't hate the Britishers, but we hate someone else ruling us, and we want to be a part, we want to determine our future. it is based on that. That is a perfectly good way of creating nationalism, because that allowed us to do great things. Otherwise, we would have had people fighting amongst the many Indian groups that we were, right? We created this supra identity called India, and we are able to have 1/6 of humanity living here without any world wars, which is a positive way of creating nationalism.
It is. There are many peaks and many valleys, and colonial rule in India was a valley. It's a horrible place to be. But the current Indian state is not the tallest peak. There are taller peaks that we can get to.
Yes.
So, in your example, the reason that we resisted the colonial rule in India was because of the liberal first position, that we own ourselves. We will not be subjugated in any way that, unless we consent, we will not be subjugated. Right? So, it was the classic liberal idea that drove us to claim ownership over our own bodies and our right to self-organization, self-representation, all of that. I'm saying now, inevitably, it's one step forward. For example, when you say that Deepak...
No, you use the word we. Okay, that we is important. Maybe because in a definition, it could have been that I, in my imagination, the most important word in classic liberal or libertarian canon will be not we, it will be I. So imagine if there is the Britishers are still ruling in India, okay, but they have given you, imagine they have created exactly the democratic state in Britain was supplanted here, okay. You have that kind of liberties. Would you still agree that then would you agree to be a part of the British nation?
What does that mean? Like, as in, or I'm trying to ask the question: what can I not do in the Indian state today? For example, let's say that there are some parts of India where you can't eat beef. It's not legal to eat beef. Now, what the classic liberal type or the libertarian type will argue is that idea of a nation where one can't eat beef, is a bad idea of a nation. And how do you make it good? By following the classic liberal first position. People should be allowed to do whatever they want without harming somebody else. Hence, eating beef doesn't harm somebody else. And here, harm means usually physical bodily harm. It's not constituted. And so the better nationalism will be to move in the direction of classic liberalism. When you say we all share a common history, that's perfectly fine. It's a true statement that people who are physically off this land share a common history. But when we start excluding a Nigerian man from coming and living with us simply because he is a Nigerian, then that's a bad basis to exclude somebody. Instead, we should include him. Why should we include him? Because we are all classic liberals. The liberal position is the first position. Hence, he is part of the in-group. If you just carry this to its conclusion, you're just going to end up in a classic liberal world. That's what libertarian will say, that you're right. All the things that when we say we just mean all of us who are classic liberals. And those in the Indian subcontinent who thought that the British Raj should continue in India were not part of the we, because they were not agreeing with these self-ownership ideas that we have.
See, where I would agree with this proposition is that Indian nationalism of the kind that we were talking about, the Nehruvian kind, is a form of liberal nationalism, right? These two terms are sort of sometimes contradictory, but I think Nitin has also written about it, that it can be compatible. In the Indian national idea says that you can be. Now, coming to your specific point, right, whether a person is able to eat beef in a particular area, that I don't think is a part. There can be areas where it is not, and yet people think that still we share something common, which is not concerning. I mean, beef is not that important thing in my life, and there are enough commonalities in 35 other things which are more important to me, even though we differ on this. That is also an idea of liberalism, right? You can have differences, and yet there is something more which is uniting you. This idea of whether you are allowed to eat beef or not to me, it's a question of the relationship between the state and you, not between people.
I don't think it is a liberal idea, because there is at least one person in that geography who does want to eat beef, who is not allowed to do so. Or I don't even want to use the word allowed, because that becomes a domain of the state, right? But that person doesn't subscribe to this idea of a nation. So let's say that there is a part of the country where their idea of a nation is that we eat all kinds of food except for beef. We don't eat it because of our common cultural / religious presuppositions.
So
that we
the
all
question
share.
I would ask, I get your point.
Yeah.
The question that is the person's some freedom are restricted by
Yes.
this act, right? And yet that person, so it's up to that person whether that particular act makes them feel that I am less of a part of that bigger group because I am being denied that. All of us are denied of something, right? Like,
Yes.
I mean, no one, you can't do everything that you want in any part of any group. Now, if it becomes a fundamental violation of the person's right, so important for that person that they feel that, this is something which was so core to me that is being denied, then that person will become a different nation, right? They'll start conceptualizing themselves as a different nation and that they are not part of this group, right? But on most occasions that is not what happens, because most people would think that this is one
There are enough
part of
commonalities otherwise.
there are trade-offs in living in a community, living in a bigger group. Always there will be trade-offs. I don't think you can form any community which accepts everyone's every right. Then you won't have the trade-offs are inherent.
Absolutely. What I'm still arguing is that nationalism is bad, and
no, I contest that.
And so this is
because
where the point
that
of disagreement is.
nationalism, again, I would say, though there are trade-offs, all people are having some trade-offs of one or the other kind. What is the trade-off which you would want to maintain without making that person feel that, I don't want to be a part of that nation?
Again, what the libertarian type would argue, the only trade-off I'm willing to do is the liberal paradox, right? Where I'm willing to give up my right to violence or my ability to inflict violence, because there is no right to violence per se, but I'm willing to give up my ability to inflict violence and monopolize violence with the state and give that state legitimacy so that we can all then live in a free world. The state does rule of law, defense, and nothing else, and then everything else we do. So that is a trade-off in the libertarian's mind. And the question that they're asking is, Pranay, why are you conceptualizing any nation that is not this nation? Isn't it always better? That is, if you have one nation where you're not allowed to eat beef and there's another possible nation where you are allowed to eat beef, that second nation is clearly better because it doesn't involve any... I mean, it may be a very trivial thing. Most people may be fine not eating beef their entire lives. But a second nation is just... Again, we have to get into morality here.
I agree that might be the best form of nation to be in, but that nation doesn't exist
yet. That's the claim, right?
And I don't think it will exist yet. That's what I'm saying.
Do you think that some coercion on other parties in the group on what they can do, say, eat, etc., is inevitable?
Yes, some form of trade-off is inevitable if you are forming an imagined group of even more than... I mean, even in a family you're doing trade-offs. But if you're 4 people, you're always doing trade-offs, right? So if you're a part of a bigger group, an imagined community, there will be trade-offs. Like, you can't, for example, if you're a part of the Indian nation, even the Indian state forbids you from stamping over the flag.
But the American state doesn't.
Yeah, American state doesn't. But American state has some other things.
No, so it's possible to live in a country where, or imagine a nation where treading on the flag is perfectly fine, because that doesn't take away. If clearly in America it doesn't take away from people's Americanism, then to tread on the flag should be something that we can let go, because we now have empirical evidence that, hey, you can allow people to tread on the flag.
Even in America, that's just one example from an Indian context. There are many other things in US which are also forbidden. It's not as if anyone can be a part of that nation.
Sure, yeah, which is like a prime concern that the libertarian types have. So, no, I hear the argument that you're making. It's just that I think when I try to steelman the libertarian position, what they're trying to say is that when they say that nationalism is bad, what they're saying is that if your nationalism includes anything that is outside of the classic liberal canon, those additional things in that pot are the problematic parts of the pot that we want to remove.
Correct. That's where I'm fundamentally disagreeing with, because I think those other things also can bring good outcomes, because those are more basal, those are more important to people than this idea of how the state is organized for most people. So yes, it will be by definition, in some sense it will exclude some people, because an other is important to a nation. That's why we are saying the broader you define a nation, it is good. There is some limit to it. It is inherently limited. The broader you can include it is fine. But yes, there are limits to it, and beyond a point, it will become against the other, and that's fine. I think if you want more, so just imagine a world in which India is actually 50 nations who don't believe in the idea of India. Okay, how would that world be? Would that world be in which people would? I would assume that world would be in which people are. We have all of the Indian 50 sub Indias have their own armies. All of them are probably fighting over water. All of them are probably fighting over a bunch of other things. Why you are here? Why you are? We've made that trade-off that okay, no, we will let go of that. We live in this supra identity called India. Then there will be some trade-offs we have to make as part of it, and yet we are able to live largely peacefully in this. I think that's not. I have not spoken anything about libertarianism, and
I
yet
hear you.
I think this is a better outcome and it has given us a purpose for 80 years. India, most of its, not most, all of its indicators have improved over time, and that is not constructed on libertarianism. And I think that's a better way to live.
No, again, in a world of many valleys and many peaks, we are certainly on a peak. We are not a warring state. You and I are able to record a podcast and not go to jail for saying things, or we don't struggle to get food on our tables. Certainly, this is a peak. What the libertarians are arguing is that there is a taller peak which we're not getting to because of these other elements added in. When I was reading up for this podcast, you also told me to look up Balaji Srinivasan and the network state as an idea, right? And so I went down the rabbit hole and I was doing some reading. And I don't know if you know about this, but there is a small group of people who started like a company called Seasteading, if I'm not wrong. And the idea is they're setting up colonies to live in the ocean. It's international waters. And they're just making an investment, setting up anchors that go deep into the ground, floating cities in effect. You fly in or boat in and you fly out. But these are permanent habitats that you can live in, figuring out how to grow plants, vegetation, poultry, solar panels, of course, so you have power supply. But basically, this is a fully self-contained place that you can come and live. And of course, the person who started this seems to be very libertarian leaning, right? So their broad premise is that you come, what you own is private property, your labor is your labor, you contract, with each other. We will limit your ability to inflict harm, so you can't be violent, and we will be violent. If somebody is too violent, we'll put them in a box, or we'll have a judiciary that tells them what to do. So we'll do rule of law, we'll do the delivery of defense, police, all of that. But beyond that, this is your space. You can buy into the country. Now let's assume this actually plays off, and you do end up building cities in the ocean, right? Everybody who shows up there knows the constitution or the terms and conditions, which is nothing that is beyond the typical classic liberal canon. Now, of course, that canon itself has so many disagreements internally. But let's say, okay, for a moment that it is a monolith, and so everybody here is consenting to the classic liberal position, and they build out a country there, right? The libertarian type would now contend.
They build a state or a country? It's a political
That's a good question. Yeah, I think it in effect will become a political institution. Yeah, and so it will be a country.
State.
And then a state, yeah. Then they will have an elected body, right? All of those things. Now, the libertarian would contend that the people living there live on a higher peak than the people living in India. Because there they can eat beef. Because there they can paint a goddess naked. Because there they can do things that you would not be able to do in India.
Okay. First of all, the most important part of that nation state in this conception is that nation state should survive for it to honor all those values, right? If it doesn't survive, all those values get washed away. And what determines whether it survives or not? It will have to have an army.
Yes.
Because there is Matsya Nyaya in the international affairs realm, right? The big fish eats the small fish. There's no morality in international affairs.
No doubt, yeah.
So you can create this utopia. Someone will come and walk over it. So you will have to create an armed force. You will have to create a powerful state which can withstand other predatory powers in that region.
And taxation. 100%.
Yeah. And once you want to create an armed force, you will also have to do taxation to survive.
Yes.
So, yeah. So that state, yes, it might be a higher peak only to the extent that it survives. And its survival is contingent on it being able to resist other bigger powers.
Correct.
So if it is able to survive other bigger powers, then I would agree with it. But my contention is most likely it won't.
Okay. I'm trying to get at this two ways, but I'm struggling. Okay. So on one side, I'm saying if we create a new state, you're saying, Deepak, that won't survive. I'm saying, okay, Pranay, we have a state.
Yeah.
Now this state, let's nudge it in the direction of classic liberalism so that in 50 years, we end up in a classic liberal place, right? That's what Indian libertarians are doing. Like Indian libertarians and liberal types, classic liberal types, not left liberals, are saying that, hey, what we want to do is, that is my nationalism. Everything else in the pot, let's throw it out. But when they throw those things out, you're saying, hey, that this is anti-national. Like in the sense that when somebody says that I don't buy into this idea of India, they are being called anti-national or not nationalists. I'm contending that they really are nationalists. Just that their pot contains nothing that's not classic liberal values. That's all. And there's only two options, right? I mean, how else do I can say that, Pranay, either this big state that we have that is safe, that is not getting attacked, we do have nuclear weapons, so there is some amount of detente, this state is the one that we push, or I can give you the example of a new state that we create. But ultimately that peak is a higher peak. And so they are better nationalists than anybody who has anything in the pot that's not the classic liberal position.
My contention is I don't think they think of themselves in this way that you have characterized, where they think that nationalism is a important idea. So that might just be a fundamental starting point difference between the two of us. In my imagination, individualism is central to it. So any community which tramples over the idea of the individual is bad in that conception to me. An individual is the supreme power. So it in that sense it thinks of nation also, given that is a biggest group, is a net negative. Whereas for me it is not.
The reason I'm thinking about it like this, right? Maybe you're right. And I have not actually spoken to any classic liberal types about their ideas on this, which, I'd be curious to know what they think. Inherent in that definition always, when you ask a liberal type, hey, what do you believe in? They'll say, look, we believe in negative rights. Everybody owns their own body, etc., etc. And so we must create the night watchman state. Their sentence always ends with the state. Because there is no way to build any sort of a meaningful libertarian or liberal status quo without the state. It is compulsory. Unless you have a monopoly of violence with the state, it is not possible to have your negative rights respected, defended, private contracts enforced, a market be free. And because the state is fundamental to it, the state is some subset of nation, right? The state is part of a country. The country clearly has a vision, a story. That story is the nation story. And so they must have a national story. And that national story then clearly is classic liberalism. That has been my thinking of how.
It's interesting. You're saying for libertarianism as a definition, the state is so important, right? Like, whereas
Absolutely.
the conceptualization of libertarianism in common terms is that the state should be as small as possible.
It should be as small as possible, but it should be a really effective state at the two roles that we have described: rule of law and defense. And nothing else. Then everything else you please leave to us libertarians to do what we want to do. But rule of law and defense you will do really well.
I would see, as we are discussing, right, we are sympathetic to those ideas, right? So I am also sympathetic to all those ideas. I'm just saying it is impractical. It won't. There are much more powerful forces which we think of when we think of a commonality between you and me. It is not necessarily defined on this conception of what I think about how my state should be, and that's the whole point.
On this note, should we take a quick break? So we'll see you on the other side. Hi Pranay, welcome back.
Glad to be back.
Okay, we were discussing this over the break. I'll try and phrase it for the listener, and then it'll be a question as well. When we think about people, so this is in continuation to our, libertarian arc, right? Because that's where we stopped in the previous half. People who are liberal but live in India, right, seem to be on this mission to want to reform the country. So they're saying that I have an idea of what India should be, and it's not what India currently is, and I want to proactively work on reforming this country. And then you would contest that then the idea of India comes before their liberalism. That is, they already have some notion, some feeling in their bones of what it means to be Indian. They identify with this feeling, I am an Indian. And then they extend that definition by saying, but India is imperfect. And the way it would be perfect is if it met my preferred political ideology. Which I thought was really interesting, because then you're saying that they are still nationalist because they have an idea of India, and that it's not like liberalism is their nationalism. It's that they have nationalism and then want to induce liberalism into that nationalism. Correct. Something like that. Yeah. I'll hand it back to you if you want to phrase it better.
No, that's perfect, right? Because all the people that we are talking about, they always have a choice to go out of India and go into a place where there is probably more liberalism of the kind that they want. And many people make that choice as well, right? But the people who are willing to stay back or still want to reform India, and we know changing India is not an easy game, right?
Yeah.
Like even to fix a small problem, it takes time. The fact that they are willing to do that says that they are deeply passionate about this idea of India. They are nationalistic about India, and then they want to change India for the better, which is of some other values.
Okay, I have so many things to say here, but let me first, let's try and say something about their idea of India. If you had to think about it, okay, so the liberal type who continues to stay in India and argue for freedom values and argue for India to be a more freedom-heavy place, what is their idea of India? Like, if you had to take a wild guess, or if you had to postulate, what do you think India is to them if it's not liberalism?
Correct. So I think subconsciously they also relate to this, that there is something common between the people who are in this part of the world, which separates them from people outside this world. That now, because all of these are based on when the person, as we discussed earlier, there's some past story and there is common consent of the daily lived experience. So for a person who was born in say 70s 80s, they can't hark back to the freedom struggle, right? Because they were not born at that point of time. But when they became a part of the society, there was an idea of India which told them about, India is in a particular way. There was a freedom struggle. There is some diversity, but that diversity, there is some unity in that diversity. They have bought into that idea, right? And that's the story that they have bought into. And they have also bought into the story that it is better for me to be part of this India, which is, again, the state is also trying to manufacture it on a daily basis, and the society also reinforce. It can be done in bad ways, it can be done in good ways. I'm not contesting that. But you sing the Jana Gana Mana or the national anthem in your school. There is some idea that you are creating. You watch movies. Those movies have put something in your mind, and all those are important. None of that talks about libertarianism, but yet they believe that we are part of this.
Which is really interesting. Two potential explanations I can offer. One is that they are just pragmatic, right? That's one way to look at it. The pragmatism comes from the fact that I cannot immigrate out of the country. If I go there, I won't be a citizen. It'll take me a long time to become a citizen. I have to rebuild my life. I have to rebuild all my social connections. My family is here. It's not really about India. It's a lot of pragmatism about the fact that living anywhere else is practically not possible, given that I was born here and I was brought up here. I know the language here. I know the people here. And so my best shot at liberalism in the place I live is to turn the place I currently live into a liberal world, as opposed to going and finding that world, because I already have a little bit of, a life here. And that may be pragmatic as opposed to the story. They may not have really bought into the story of I am quote unquote an Indian, but more that there's pragmatism. Or the second is the opposite, which is irrationalism. So, for example, like why do women who get beat up by their husbands stay with their husbands? It's not rational, right? Like this is just some sort of odd loyalty that seems to be a human thing that we just pick up on, but they're just behaving clearly irrationally. And the more practical path for them to take is to stop fighting the fight here, but to go abroad. And they don't do it because they're not really thinking straight. Two potential reasons. I don't know. I'm thinking out loud.
Yeah, I think the most pragmatic position will be, why think of changing anything? Just live with your life and make your individual outcomes better. That would be the most pragmatic. I mean, thinking of changing any country, whether it is yours or someone else, is itself irrational, right? The rational position is, I mean, why do you care about it? You have your life, you have your family, just think of it and be happy. That would be the more pragmatic position. So, in fact, all these positions are irrational in one way or the other.
Yeah, no, I hear you. But that would extend to anybody who's working on national reform. Okay, anybody in your world of public policy, thinking about the country, etc. Broadly, the question could be, why are you even spending time trying to fight this fight?
Yes.
Focus on individual outcomes, and you could do that. You could spend your entire life like just hedonistically trying to optimize your own outcomes.
Exactly. But yet you think of a broader us. And that us can be defined in different ways. And most people who are in that sphere and in India think of that India as their us, right? Rather than going to another country and trying to change it. So is it irrational? Yes. Because the pragmatic position is to just live in your atomic self, but you are not, and that is irrational. Yes, but what is it more irrational than going to another country and changing it? I don't think so, because we are talking about the people who have that agency, so we are already talking about a self-selected number of people who are high achieving a lot, who have already done things. I think for them it's not difficult. The more pragmatic path for them would be to go in a country which is already liberal and change it at the margin. But I think those people, the fact that they are high achieving, also think that they can afford to be more irrational. They can take the bigger challenge. And that is why probably they think that India, and they connect with that idea of India even more.
Yeah. Okay, so the first thing is that game theory matters, right? So if I was living in present day Iran, I ask myself, what would it take for me to go out in the streets and be one of the protesters? Now, I know the consequences are serious. Protesters in the last 2-3 months from where we're recording have been killed in Iran for coming out and talking out against the regime. And so being silent may not be the ever-present pragmatic option. Like at some point there's a game theory math that kicks in here and says now it makes sense to talk, because it's a slippery slope. If you don't intervene, then only those who are in power will continue to be in power. You don't intervene, nobody else intervenes, and then over time you have an autocratic dictatorship and you live in that country. Then it's not worth it, the result. Also, it's too hard to turn the tide at that point. So that's maybe like one reason. So what do you think about this? Do you think that the game theory aspect may be why, instead of choosing to focus on individual outcomes, people like you or other liberal types are still focusing on trying to change the country, because they think that if they do that, it prevents the slippery slope of their own lives from devolving into more autocratic outcomes, and then in general everybody's life improves. So that's also good.
I don't think so, because there is an irrational, quote unquote irrational, because but there is this idea that there is something more important than your own self, right? I mean, you believe in the idea of India or whatever that idea may be. That is important. I mean, take the Iran example itself, right? Iranians who are opposing the autocratic rule still don't want to go with the US, or they for them the Persian nation is very important, and they are raising the idea of a Persian nation which preceded the Islamic Revolution of 1979, right? Why are they doing that? They are not saying I want to become a libertarian or I want a libertarian. They are saying I want a Persian nation which was existing before. Why?
Absolutely, yeah. That's really curious. Now, okay, I'm going to end the arc of me trying to be a libertarian, but for this specific example, what a libertarian would tell you is just that that they haven't got the full idea. So they've gotten halfway there. They realize that living in an autocratic world is worse because there's a theft of consent. They just haven't gone all the way. So it's just a matter of time. Just like democratic ideals took some time to come around, libertarian ideals will take some time to come around. And what will be curious for me to see is, do we end up in a world with lots of liberal countries? That is, okay, let's say the arc of liberalism carries through, okay, in theory. And in general, you have lots of highly liberal countries. For example, like Canada and the US are both fairly liberal places to live, but they're still distinct. Like a Canadian strongly feels that they are Canadian and not American.
Why?
Yeah, exactly. That's the question of like why. And again, I'm not contending that there is a nation or that nationalism exists. Clearly, those two things exist. Just this whole like nationalism is good versus it's a problem. That's the bit that I'm trying to figure out. And in the case of Canada and the US, again, libertarian type would just say that all the good parts of the nationalism are all the liberal parts of the nationalism, and all the bad parts of the nationalism are all the illiberal parts. And so those two things become equal. Okay, I'm beating a dead horse here. This other example that we spoke about over the break, which I was mulling over when I was making the notes as well, is whether a nation has to always be a political institution that is, I don't know what the right word for this is, that is public. In the sense that, okay, today we have a democracy, so the people elect their representatives. But in the past, you had kingdoms, dictatorships, autocracies, maybe oligarchies. We've never had privately run countries. And one of the things I've been thinking about is whether it's possible 200 years from now to have entire countries that are run as corporations. And the thought experiment here is we can think about Mars. So when SpaceX, let's say, does land on Mars, the first 1,000 people who land on Mars, in effect, have to now start operating like a political institution because somebody somewhere is going to commit a crime. Again, the classic liberal conception would be that that's when politics comes into the fore. Why it matters is when harm or violence takes place. To prevent an all-out war between factions, we have to have a state intervene, somebody with a monopoly on violence. And that would be SpaceX. Like that would be the company that landed on Mars first. So they would just say, hey, you all live in these pods, and if you want to continue to live here and earn a salary from us, then these are the rules. And if you don't abide by the rules, then we will have a judiciary. And when the rule is not abided by, we will come up with a punishment, and we will dole out that punishment. I mean, I all the way to having jail cells on Mars, this has to be done privately. The alternative is maybe that because they're flying under the American flag, they could enforce the American Constitution there. Maybe there would be like a tele-justice, where like an American justice sitting in America would rule on a case that took place on Mars because technically that's happening with American citizens. I'm not really sure what the math here is. But I can think of a world where we end up with completely private countries. Like SpaceX says that these 10,000 square kilometers belong to us and nobody else. We're going to militarily prevent others from coming into this space. It may also be a technical thing, like it may be technologically impossible for somebody else to come there for a couple of maybe 10 years, 20 years, which is enough time to really get a monopoly on land. And then you're just a government employee in the sense that I work for SpaceX, but SpaceX is the government. And in effect, I'm a government employee. Everybody there is government employee. And they are my nation state. They're the country, they're the state. And then what is the idea of a nation? Is it like I'm a SpaceX employee? Or like imagine they start manufacturing cars. I'm a Tesla employee on Mars. Is that my nation? I'm just thinking out loud here, but is there another way to conceptualize a nation in 200 years?
See, we were talking about nation not as a political institution, as a political community, right? We just started there as an imagined political community. Sometimes it might not have a state, right? The Kurds are, for example, a nation. They don't have a nation state or a political institution. The Kurdish nation state doesn't exist, but they think the Kurds across Syria, Iran, Iraq, Turkey are one nation, right? Because they feel the bonds which connect other Kurds in these places are stronger than what connects them to their other state people. Okay, so that is one. So any imagined political community. Now, coming back to your question, isn't this played out in terms of East India run India was a privately run nation state, but then it became a British state, right? Finally it became so. That is just one example. There's no guarantee it will happen in the future as well. But I do think that there are different ways to conceptualize a nation. People have talked about this idea that, when Facebook and others came in the beginning, that, all the people who are consuming Facebook, or all those who are fans of, I don't know, pick a rock band or others, we are so connected to each other that we form a imagined political community, and what binds us, I don't know, like Manchester United fans are so strong that they can be more powerful than the Indian nation or the British nation. So this is seems like a ridiculous example, but you can form communities on things other than football also, which might be more powerful, maybe on religion or other things. And they can be like ISIS was actually a network state, right? Which said that you are belonging to a particular sect, you are together, and that was a powerful idea which made people do things that they wouldn't have otherwise done. So that exists. But I do feel once you have a nation formed, that those ideas eventually overcome these other nations which are forming, right? Because they are contesting with already existing nations, and many times the existing ideas of nation overrun them. There are people did try to create other kinds of nations, but you're seeing that even social media has actually reaffirmed the old ideas of nations rather than creating new nations. At least maybe it will change, but I think nations are much more powerful than we think.
Let's say that you ended up on Mars, okay, as a SpaceX employee, and you're an American citizen. What is your idea of a nation? I mean, if justice is doled out by SpaceX, the rules are written by SpaceX, the law of the land is governed by SpaceX, then at some point your idea of a nation also will change. Like you won't be thinking anymore that I'm an American, because that place, that the physical place that America points to is on Earth, which is like 4 light minutes away.
Correct. No, I agree. There will be some contestation about it. I mean, we can take the East India example itself, right? British people said, you guys are part of us, even though you are subjugated to us, you are. But Indians refused that idea and said, we are a different nation. The same thing happened with the US, right? British, the colonialists went there, and then they said, yeah, first you are part of the British nation, but then the Americans said, no boss, we are far away from you, we have our own values, and we will probably form another nation. So maybe their SpaceX, when that happens, there will initially be a contestation, and maybe there depends how that contestation is managed, but yeah, at that point of time your idea of a nation would be depends on how SpaceX frames it, because SpaceX will create its own story. It will not just be that you are an employee. That's like a mass story. No one is going to buy it, right? Then, so they'll create a story which is, we conquered humanity's most difficult problems. We are these great species who has gone away, and there will be a god created of it, probably. I don't know, right? And there will be these stories which will be told. So again, we'll come back to that manufactured consent on a daily basis and the history, how powerful that story of you is, and
what we've done to get here.
Yeah.
What may be more interesting actually to me is the story of the future, that we are now a spacefaring species, and what we will do tomorrow is a very powerful story. We didn't discuss that so far, but I think a large part of the national story is always that, right? What we will do tomorrow is a huge part of. It's the promise of, if you are part of the in-group, it's the promise of what is to come.
Exactly. And I think in the future part is where the other also becomes important, because if that future is about contesting some non-human entity, okay, then I think it's a weak story again. Like, I mean, climate change, for example, is a big threat for the world. That is not uniting us into a one species which is contesting.
Yeah,
most of the things are framed as national purposes, right? And in that sense, so that will be contingent on whether those people who are on Mars, then maybe the people on the Earth become the other to them, and then they're saying, see, they define their future as, we have to be better than those people. They are not like us. They suck. We will be better. And that's how our future will be better. So the other becomes important. Then they might create their own nation. Okay. So they won't call them SpaceX employees, right? There will be a better story that they will come up with.
This is such an odd tangent, but I don't know. I've been thinking a lot about it. I thought it was just interesting to bring up. Okay, final thing I'm going to trouble you on is the idea of the other, right? One of the largest problems that anybody with a nationalist, an anti-nationalist position has is that what we do to others is incorrigible. It's something we cannot justify. Through history, we've done really inhuman things to people in the camp of the other. And it's one of the biggest pitfalls of nationalism, that sure, in group, all of us are happy and dandy and we'll lend each other books to read. But if you're part of the out group, then we put you in a gas chamber. And that feels to me like a meaningful critique of nationalism, because what we were saying is something like, hey, unfortunately, as human beings, we have this tribal mentality. We have in-group, out-group. Because of evolution, this is where we ended up. However, if we were to zoom out and do something like an objective morality, if we would make a claim about objective morality, we would say things like all people are equal, all people should be treated equally. These are all parts of the objective moral claim. Now, we coalesce into nation groups because it is the easiest way for us to, I'm making the opposition, easiest way for us to do big things together. If you want to embark on serious projects that take 20 years, we have to have a coherent story that goes back 200 years so that we can look forward 20 years. No one's going to collectively do so much work otherwise. So it's an organization of convenience, but one that we should truly believe in. It's not like it's not a heuristic that you can just say approximately. You have to truly believe in this. I'm an Indian, I'm an American, whatever, I'm a Pakistani position. Otherwise, we're not going to get anywhere. But in believing that, we also end up then being able to do horrible things to people in the out group. This could be small things like war. But like one example I can bring up is, if there are people who reside physically inside a country but don't agree with the idea of the nation in that country, then they are part of the out group from a national identity standpoint. So in India, for example, I don't know, some right-wing Hindutva group may view Muslims as the out group, or Muslims may view Hindus as the out group. And when they do that, then they somehow give themselves license to do horrible things to those people because they're not in the same in-group, right? How do you address this? I mean, so the critique is, when you say nationalism is a good idea, we're pushing back by saying that, in fact, it's a bad idea because we end up doing horrible things to people in the out group.
Yeah, absolutely, right? Nationalism can do bad things. It has done bad things as well, right? So that's where my contention was, that you need to think of better ways of defining nationalism, because nationalism will always exist. So that was my starting point also. Now here, my answer to that would be, there are various ways to define the other. Let's first take the domestic scenario, right? There will be minorities of one form or the other in any nation state. Now, that's where the role of the state becomes important. A state will say that a state which is a republic will say that irrespective of whether you are part of the majority or not, certain things we will protect. The state will protect. You have a right to live, and we can't take that away. Even if 99.99% people agree that you should be killed, you can't, because there is a rule of law and you have to follow that. So that's the role of the state. Whereas it is the job of the community to make the people, to frame the idea of a nation in such a way that it includes the people who are not of that, who are quote unquote minorities, right? So that's the part, that's the nation building process. There can be bad ways of doing it, there can be good ways of doing it. In India itself, you can see good ways of doing it and bad ways of doing it, right? So that there can be various ways. Okay, that is one. Now, defining other with respect to someone who's outside the country's borders, I think there, again, you can see from the Indian nationalism idea, there are two ways. The Indian nationalism, which the dominant strand of the freedom struggle, that said that we don't hate the Britishers, we hate British rule. So if you go away, we are okay with you. Can you imagine India and Pakistan's head of armed forces were still Britishers after we booted them out? How does that happen, right? So we were okay with people who are, and we have seats reserved for Anglo-Indians. We had, like, how does that happen? So the idea was that, okay, we don't want your rule, but we don't hate you. But obviously that's not how not all nationalisms are that enlightened, right? Some will say, yeah, we hate you just because you are of a different color and we will kill you because of that. That also exists, so I'm not denying that. But there's a flip side also, which I want people to know.
But Pranay, enlightened nationalism is liberal nationalism. We're just ending up with classic liberal positions codified as part of a constitutional republic. Because then what you're saying is that there are no others. In large part, if you agree with our first principles,
there is an other.
But
we won't do ugly things to the other.
But who is the other? Like, okay, for example, let's say that there is a man in Pakistan. Okay, you would say, Deepak, he is the other. But if he comes to our border and says, guys, I'm an Indian, I agree with everything that you guys are saying in India. I want to live peacefully as part of the Indian state. May I come in? In your ideal world, you would say, yes, of course, please come into our country, because we need people who broadly agree with our ideas, who want to live peacefully, who will add productive value to the country. There's no reason to turn you down. Please come in and join us. And that person is now an Indian. And that's it, that we've reached. So the only other is somebody who is not a classic liberal. That is, somebody who disagrees with liberal positions is the only other.
No, but he can subscribe to the idea of India in many ways, right? Maybe he believes in the civilizational continuity of India. That is the idea. When you say that he subscribes to an idea of India and we accept it, it's not based on liberal, his accepting liberal ideology. It is on some other parameter. Maybe he says, we were part of Indus Valley. Indus Valley is actually in Pakistan. We are part of the same nation.
Yeah.
Then?
And so is that a good idea of India? That is, when you say, okay, so of course you're not saying that every idea of a nationalist, every nationalist position is a good idea, right? The idea of a Nazi Germany is a bad nationalist idea. And if I was to like draw a chart and say, okay, for all the nationalist ideas that have come to fore in the last 500 years, put them on a gradient of bad to good. On one extreme, you'll put things like, I don't know, the imperial Japanese state and things like that. And on the other extreme, you'll put up places like the UK, the US today, right? You'll say India today. You'll say these are places that are better than those places in that gradient. And then if I try to like probe and say, okay, so now if I give you like a civilizational state as one option for India's nationality, India's nationalism, and another which is being a multi-ethnic, plural, secular India, right? In that gradient, you will put the civilizational identity story of India, like that being the predominant story, more on the bad spectrum, and the us not being a purely Hindu republic, for example, as being on the more good part of the spectrum. If I'm wrong here, you tell me.
Yeah, I think these two don't necessarily contradict each other, because the old Hindu idea of nationalism, not the Hindutva idea, is essentially plural in nature. Because Hinduism was plural, right? You could be a Vaishnavite, you could be a Shaivite, you could have a lot of other things so that it is inherently plural. Sorry.
Then I make a mistake. If the civilizational story is a pluralistic story, then no problem. They're part of the same camp. If a Hindu Rashtra story, right? So we want to set up a Hindu state is one of the stories that's present. And the other story is a pluralist state that has a long civilizational history of being pluralist. I'm presuming that you would put the Hindu Rashtra position as being more on the bad side of the spectrum. Yeah. Now, I didn't want to go into this on the podcast, but we then have to define what is bad and what is good, and what is there something like objective morality. We have that whole argument. But let's say, okay, given that you and I, we've come this far, let's say this is where you are. Now, if I try and ask you why, like what helped you decide that this was more bad and this is more good, I think what you'll be using are the liberal positions. Like you'll just say, hey Deepak, this is better because it's more liberal. That is, we're not excluding somebody based on religion. We don't think it's a meaningful ground to exclude somebody or religious belief. As long as the person practices whatever they want to practice but doesn't harm anybody, that's perfectly fine by me. Right? Or they don't come and change the constitutional structure to make India illiberal, that's fine by me. Right? If they believe in the things that we believe in, it's good. And then that arrow, the direction of that arrow just points more and more and more towards just classic liberalism. That is, I'm trying to understand what are grounds for exclusion. Who is the other? And the only grounds for exclusion are people who are not liberal. If they want to coerce me into doing something I don't want to do, or change the structure of my constitution to make that possible, then we want to say, fuck off. You're not part of this country. Everybody else, you're welcome. Right? So, we don't want to do horrible things to a man in Pakistan who believes in everything that we believe in. We want to do horrible things to a man in India who doesn't believe in anything that we believe in, because that person's fundamentally liberal. this is, I mean, is there a gap here? Like clearly that arrow is, then you're just going to, if we keep pushing that, we're going to end.
Yeah, see, as we began with, the Indian nationalism, the good Indian nationalism we are talking about is a form of liberal nationalism, right? So that we agree on it. But I'm saying the constituents of that liberal nationalism are not just based on classic liberal. There are some things which are uniting us because of our linguistic heritage or our cultural heritage, which are holding us together.
But the pushback here is, if those are things that are uniting us, those are also things that are grounds to make somebody another.
Yes.
Right? And that's what I'm asking you. If we exclude somebody based on linguistic heritage or cultural heritage, is that a good idea?
It is. The way I would put it is, I don't think it is a good idea, but it is the way it would be. It is unavoidable.
In this story of nationalism. But you can have so many stories. And so...
I'm saying that every national story will run against some limits. It will be inherently limited. That's what the definition of a nation is, right? It will be limited. It will define someone as the other. It's just, you can only determine what you do to the other, but nothing else. There will be limited.
And so, I mean, we end up in a world... So I'm thinking about something like, we end up in a world where we have a country where we can get a lot of stuff done, but on the dark side, we are also excluding people who, for example, don't speak Indian languages, right? Because that constitutes... and just to steelman your position, you're saying something like that this is as far as we can get. Realistically, if you want to get stuff done, you have to be part of a tight-knit course, a tight-knit, closely knit group, and it can't be too big. So it has to be as big as possible without ripping apart, which means that there's going to be some boundary condition. Those conditions may be culture, history, language, at which point then, yes, we're going to get a big project, I don't know, like a dam project done in India, but it also means at the border, we're not going to let somebody who speaks Japanese come into the country.
Yeah, I think in the partition of India tells you that story. The idea of India, which was that big, some people didn't subscribe to that idea. It hit that limit and it didn't exist as an entity. And people walked out of it, right? And probably it was good because those people didn't want to be a part of this. Many people chose to be a part of this, right? And they subscribed to this idea.
Then as a final thought, I'm wondering how much the idea of a nation has to do with pragmatism versus idealism. So when I talk to somebody on the right and they say we want a Hindu Rashtra, they have no pragmatism in that thought process. They're not saying that realistically we can build a Hindu Rashtra. They are saying that in an ideal world, what I would like is a Hindu Rashtra. There is no real physical on-ground path to manifesting this that is statistically likely, right? It's a statistically unlikely path, but it doesn't take away from their ability to have this idea of a nation, right? And when I propose the idea of a fully classic liberal nation, you're saying, Deepak, that's a great idea. It's just not practically feasible. There's no literal nation that can exist where you can't have exclusion. Anybody can walk in, except for those who are intolerant. Everybody else can be in part of the country. This is not a real thing. These countries will fracture. Pragmatically, the best that you get is an approximately classical liberal democracy, democratic republic, and some history, culture, all of that baked in, right? But which is it? Like, should a nation be an idealistic view that may not be pragmatically feasible, but one that we wake up every day and constantly aspire towards, or one that is baked in pragmatism, that realistically this is what we can get, and so let's sell this idea? Because it seems to me that when politicians do this, politicians sell ideal visions. The Marxist story is an idealist story, the libertarian story is an idealist story. Everybody seems to have an idealist position, and then they convince each of us to vote with our feet. And if it is an idealist story, then you should be a libertarian. And if it's a pragmatic story, then I agree with you. Then you're just saying that, Deepak, this is as far as we can get. And that feels fair. Like, it feels like in 2026, I can't see a path to, pushing that arrow all the way to the extreme.
Yeah. I think the Nehruvian kind of Indian nationalism, which is very broad, is the most ideal situation you can get to. There is nothing more ideal than that. That is the limit. I think after that you can't think of a broader nation state.
Who does Nehru exclude?
The Britishers. They are not part of us. People, he includes everyone who has some historical, cultural continuity with the Indian experience and subscribes to it.
And so my man from Nigeria test would be what?
If the man from Nigeria comes, lives here, is subscribed to this idea, as I said, right, there is some form, some cultural
man
community,
from,
there's that, and then also has we took the Sonia Gandhi example.
so man
also.
from London, because
Yeah.
you said Britishers specifically.
The Britishers at that point
that
of
time.
time. Yeah.
But-
Some stayed back, right?
Exactly.
As those who were willing to subscribe to the idea of India, they probably learned how to live here. They became more Indian. They adopted, they subscribed to that idea that yes, India was a positive. See, Britishers generally had a negative idea about India also, right? Then there were some who said we actually subscribe to the idea of India. So if they did that, people accepted them, there was a daily manufactured consent, then they became a part.
So I usually end the podcast asking the guest to steel man the opposing side. So if you were in my shoes, what would you say if you had to, disagree? Because I mean, nothing I say on the podcast is always my personal view. I'm just saying whatever is the best argument against something. But before that, I want to say thank you, because I'd never thought about nationalism before this, and now I'm convinced that every guest I've spoken to, but every intellectual in India who thinks meaningfully about topics that they care about, should proactively advocate for a story. Without the story, they're not going to convert this into something that's tangible on ground. So you may believe in whatever you believe in, but I mean, I can see what you're saying, that without us telling the story over and over again, and having our fellow brothers and sisters also agree that this is a story of India, whatever that story is, it may be history, it may be civilization, it may be religion, it may be libertarianism, it may be Marxism, communism, whatever, it doesn't matter. But if you believe in something, it is practically useless to have that belief kept to yourself. And the only way to do it is to bake it into national identity. That you need to bring this story into the definition of what somebody feels when they say that I'm an Indian or an American or whatever their nationality is. Otherwise, it's impossible to have that change actually manifest on ground, because we do live in a democratic republic. So yeah, I mean, I'd never thought about this. I'm very grateful that you even mentioned it as a topic, but I'm going to give you the steel man, and then if you have any final words. If you were in my position and you had to push back against what you believe in, what's the best case argument against it?
Yeah, I mean, the first principle would be nationalism has done terrible things in the world. So it generally, people have this experience that especially the European nationalism, right? I mean, when we say European nationalism, the nationalism which preceded European Union and others, right? That nationalism is where all these books came from, right? So their perception, generally nationalism leads to bad things. That's how it has happened in Europe. And hence, we should not think of nationalism as something which can lead to positive. So if you draw a ledger, mostly things will be on the liability side and on the asset side. That's how I would put it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, just to sort of again steelman your case, right? But what you're saying is that because it is unavoidable, that's the premise. The premise is that nationalism is unavoidable, and because it is unavoidable, then it is incumbent on us to make the best story possible.
Yes.
But if you do make up a good story, then you have good nationalism.
Yes.
Like, it's possible to end up in a world where that story is a force for good as opposed to a force for bad. I don't know if it's also true for the listeners, but this has given me a lot of food for thought. And then preparing for this podcast has been really fun. I hope you had fun, Pranay.
Yes, definitely. I had fun, Deepak. It was a fun evening to spend.
Thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thank you.